Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Madeline Mejia, and I will be your host for tonight. I'm excited to see so many people who have joined us for this very important webinar. I'm going to ask for you to mute yourselves if you have not yet muted yourselves. We are recording this event. Um, I'm the VP of Programs for the Harvard Club of Southern California. I'm also an alumna of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, class of 2000. And part of some of our board members are here. So I want to recognize the work that we have done to prepare everyone for the different webinars that we are presenting to support victims and families of those who have experienced the LA fires. Right when this happened, we came together quickly as a board and we talked about what would be some of the things that we could do to support our not only Harvard community, but also the rest of the Los Angeles community that has experienced this loss. And we created the LA
going to Israel.
So we created the LA Fires Assistance Committee, and we created several different resources. So at the end of this meeting, I will be sending out an email with links to different resources that you can peruse through and also view the different webinars that we've recorded. So this is a very much needed event, and I want to begin by thanking Kimia Grigoriev, a recent graduate and alumna from Harvard, who helped put together this panel by contacting her professors. And I will get us started right away so we can hear from our wonderful panel. So our panel will include Dr. David Mischoulon, who will talk to us about the differences when we diagnose grief and when we diagnose depression. And then we will hear from Reverend Mel Kawakami, who will talk to us about spirituality and faith. Next, we will go with Kimia Grigoriev, who will talk to us about families and children and how do we support children who are experiencing this loss as well. And then we'll close out our session with Cynthia Meyersburg, with Dr. Cynthia Meyersburg, who will talk to us also about different strategies for resilience. So we will be recording this first portion of the event. And during the Q&A, I will stop the recording to provide that space for everyone to feel comfortable asking the questions that they want to ask. Again, as a reminder, I'm going to ask that you please mute yourself because we want to provide the time and space for our presenters. So I will turn this over to our presenters now. So Dr. Mischoulon, if you can get us started.
Thank you very much, Madeline. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be showing some slides, so I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, everyone will see them. All right. Can people see the slides? Please nod your head. Great. Thank you. All right. So this section of the talk may be a bit dry, but I think it'll be helpful because I'm going to be talking about the difference between grief, depression, bereavement. What do we mean when we use these terms? So I think in the remaining talks that I'll talk about these concepts more specifically in the context of the LA wildfires, I think this initial presentation should help everyone to be comfortable with the terminology. So basically, I'm going to go over briefly the diagnostic criteria that we use in psychiatry for grief versus major depressive disorder. And I'll give you all an idea of how to tell them apart. And then I'll talk briefly about general treatment approaches. I know some of the later talks like Cynthia's are going to be about sort of how to manage this grief. So let me make a few comments about major depressive disorder, which is really the bread and butter of psychiatric treatment. It's the most common of all the psychiatric disorders. It'll affect probably somewhere between 10 and 25% of women in a lifetime and 5 to 12% of men. So women are about twice as likely to get depression at some point in their lives. For the psychiatrist treating depression, suicide is always the biggest worry because it does happen often in people with depression, though not in the majority. Maybe 10 to 25% of people with depression may commit suicide at some point. Depression has a very significant public health impact. It's considered among the top 10 leading causes of death in the US, as well as causes of disability. Primary care doctors are often the first clinicians to see depression. About 10% of their patients may have it. And in inpatient settings, such as an inpatient medical ward, the rates go up to 15%. So any mental health clinician needs to be on the lookout for depression, or just as general clinicians should as well. Let me just briefly talk about what do we mean when we say major depression. These are the criteria from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, 5th edition, or DSM-5 as it's called. So to meet criteria for depression, an individual must have a depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, and or anhedonia, or loss of interest. So they need at least one of those two for the diagnosis, and they need to have at least a total of 5 symptoms, including 3 to 4 of the ones that follow. For example, sleep disturbances, too much or too little, decrease in interest in activities, which we talked about, guilty feelings, fatigue or lack of energy, trouble with concentration, disturbances in appetite, again, can be too much or too little, psychomotor changes, which can mean agitation or slowing, and suicidal thoughts, which can be not necessarily thinking about killing oneself, but just a strong preoccupation with death. Now, let me emphasize this, what we call the differential diagnosis. When doctors are evaluating a patient, they have to consider multiple causes for the way the patient is presenting. And with regard to depression, there can be many things that can present with depression as the chief complaint. So there's any kind of central nervous system insult, like a stroke, a tumor, multiple sclerosis, seizures, and so forth. Several medical illnesses, vitamin deficiencies, AIDS, heavy metal poisoning, and many others can also present with depression. Medications taken for medical conditions can also trigger depression. Steroids, for example, are among the highest offenders. And there are also other psychiatric disorders, such as bipolar illness, which can have a manic and a depressive phase, schizophrenia, dementia, delirium, PTSD, substance abuse. All of these can present with depression. So when a psychiatrist sees depression in the clinical setting, they have to think of what are all these potential causes. And finally, bereavement and grief, which I put in red because it's the main focus of this symposium. That too can look like depression. And when we go through the rest of these slides, we'll have a good understanding of how to pick it out from depression or other conditions. Now, let me talk about kind of a historical fact about how we diagnose depression. There used to be what we call the bereavement exclusion, meaning that if an individual was presenting with bereavement, that was actually used to rule out major depressive disorder. So the idea was, if you're grieving, you can't be considered as having major depressive disorder. This exclusion was removed in the DSM-5. So now bereavement actually falls under the major depression umbrella. This decision was rather controversial. The pros are basically that there's no well-established basis for ruling out a diagnosis of major depression just because it's occurred shortly after a major loss, such as the death of a loved one or losing your home in a fire. The downside of it is that it's thought to maybe medicalize normal grief, and as such can lead some doctors to maybe be too eager to prescribe antidepressants when the individual might recover over the course of time with no specific treatment. And the fact is, bereavement and depression do share many features, but they are distinct conditions. That's a very important thing to remember, and they can be distinguished with a careful eye. So let's talk about acute grief. So acute grief is defined as an immediate reaction to a loss. That is to say, an emotional state. And the primary features of it can include feelings of sadness or even despair, hopelessness about the future, denial of the loss, anger about it, guilt, crying, and loss of interest in people and activities. So you see, there can be overlap with depression in the case of acute grief. Now let's talk about uncomplicated bereavement, which is a DSM term. So this is considered to be a temporary period when the individual is grieving and mourning after a loss. The duration of uncomplicated bereavement can vary. Commonly, it's thought to take about a year in most cases, but that can vary a lot from individual to individual. It can be less time, it can be longer. It depends on the impact of the loss. If there was a loss of a loved one, it could depend on the nature of the relationship with them. So 1 year is a good balance point, but it's not necessarily indicative for everyone. The symptoms can vary, as I showed in the previous slide. The key thing is that eventually uncomplicated bereavement has a course where the grief will subside to a point where it doesn't impact the individual's everyday life. They resume normal function, normal relationships, normal activities. So this type of bereavement usually has a mostly predictable course that ultimately leads to improvement. When that doesn't happen, then that's when things get complicated, and that's when the role of the psychiatrist or psychologist or other therapist can be important. Let me say a few words about how to self-manage during the grief process. I think it's very important to surround yourself with support, which can include friends, family, colleagues, and other people who are important in your life. Some people find it difficult to talk about their feelings, but it's been shown that talking about how you're feeling, your feelings of loss and so forth, can be therapeutic. It's been suggested for people who have trouble putting their feelings into words in a conversation to try journaling. Sometimes that can be a good way to get your thoughts and feelings out there. It's important to try to take time for self-care, so it's recommended to engage in relaxation and fun activities. Also, being gentle with yourself. For example, it's normally recommended to avoid making any major changes in your life. For example, switching jobs, moving to a new city, and so forth, in the degree possible. That by making these big decisions, it can add to the stress that you're already going through. And finally, if you're not doing well, if you're not getting better, if you feel you're actually getting worse over time, that can be a good time to seek professional care. Let me talk now about complicated bereavement. Now, this is technically called prolonged grief disorder, or PGD. Now, this involves strong feelings of grief, typically after the loss of a loved one. But again, it could apply in any other situation where there's a major loss, such as of a job or one's home and so forth. The defining feature of this is a lack of improvement over time. And there's also impairment in day-to-day function. As a psychiatrist, we diagnose this when the grief has persisted for at least a year or longer without significant improvement. In children, the period for diagnosis can be as short as 6 months. So the way complicated bereavement presents is usually there's been the major loss and a year has passed, plus intense longing for the person who died and or preoccupation with memories of the deceased. And 3 of the following, such as intense emotional pain, loneliness, disbelief or denial, emotional numbing, avoidance of reminders of the person you lost, a feeling that part of you has died, a feeling that life is meaningless, and trouble re-engaging with normal life and activities. So how do we manage it as clinicians? Depending on the situation, there can be many approaches. Usually the first line of treatment is psychotherapy, typically with a focus around grief work. Antidepressant medications are also used. I'll say a little bit about that. And often the combination of the two, particularly if grief has evolved into major depressive disorder, research shows that the combination of psychotherapy and medications are the best approach. Typically, psychiatrists should recommend antidepressants, in this case, if the patient is significantly impaired, so when the patient is having trouble functioning at work or at home, for example, getting chores done, and they seem to be getting to a point where.
Oh, hi. Yeah, you can just put it in the back. Oh, thanks.
So in those cases, we recommend antidepressants, but at the same time, we want to be cautious not to pathologize normal grief, because grief is a normal and healthy process that everyone with a major loss must go through, and we have to be respectful of the patient's need and right to grieve. Insomnia can be a very common manifestation of grief as well. And sometimes we use medications to help the patient sleep, which is fine, but we, again, should use them judiciously because these medications can have side effects as well. So to conclude, grief and bereavement are normal reactions to a loss, usually a loved one or the home or the job, etc. The good news is most individuals will recover naturally over time. But when the grief becomes prolonged, it usually requires professional help. It's also important to remember that grief can overlap with major depressive disorder. And certainly when a major depressive episode is present, that's when more aggressive treatment is usually warranted. I think the bottom line is, given these subtle similarities and differences, careful clinical judgment on the part of the treater is very important. I want everyone to know I provided some reference articles about grief versus depression, as well as articles about grief in the context of the fires. There's been quite a bit of research that's been emerging, so those will be made available to everyone, so that if they want to do some additional reading on their own, those should be good references to start with. So I want to say thank you very much for your attention, and I think we'll have some discussion later.
Thank you so much, David, for that. Next, we're going to move to Reverend Mel Kawakami. Mel?
Thank you. Let me thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on faith and spirituality following a disaster. And as part of the Harvard Alumni Disaster Preparedness and Response SIG, we've worked already with Southern California around these kinds of issues. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share with you again today. Secondly, this is not so much an academic presentation as an individual and personal one, so that while the trajectories I'll be addressing have an academic base, I've built upon that base with more personal experiences and observations. But you'll hear a lot of what Dr. Mischoulon spoke about and see those threads woven throughout my presentation. Third, I come out of a progressive Protestant theology, and so my talk may not reflect other faith traditions exactly. However, my experience, I believe, is universal enough so that other faith traditions may well find touchstones within my experience. All this being said, let me begin with the emotional trajectory following disasters. That this research comes out of the work by Tulane School of Social Work. They note 4 phases following a disaster: impact, the honeymoon phase, disillusionment phase, and reconstructive phase. And I propose using this framework to illustrate the impact of disaster on faith. Beginning with the impact phase, this initial phase occurs during and immediately following a disaster. Individuals often experience shock, disbelief, heightened anxiety, the kinds of symptoms that Dr. Mischoulon pointed to. Survival instincts oftentimes kick in, and there may be confusion, numbness, a sense of detachment. Emotions such as fear, helplessness, and guilt are common as people grapple with the immediate aftermath. So in this initial phase, faith often follows with a wide range of responses. Since faith is a coherent, organized, and structured system of belief, it's difficult for people to literally make sense of the experience they've just been through, the disaster they may have just survived. You'll hear people interviewed on the news saying, I can't believe this has happened, or I can't believe this has happened to me. They have difficulty articulating what's going on with them. I don't know what to say. I don't have any words for this. So here, faith communities can play a huge role in literally and figuratively holding survivors in a safe and caring context where they can begin to make sense of what has happened. I've literally heard people say, wow, what just happened to me? So central to this process is not to try and make sense to them, but rather to create a space whereby survivors can begin making sense for themselves. For us here in Connecticut, for example, after Sandy Hook, our bishop arrived from New York, shared worship and song, and provided a visible representation of a caring church. Offering the companionship and solace of a community helps to sponsor the second phase, known as the honeymoon phase. Spanning from a few days to several months post-disaster, this phase is characterized by a surge of optimism and community solidarity. Survivors often feel relief at having survived and communicate a strong sense of shared experience. There's typically an outpouring of support with volunteers and aid organizations providing a lot of assistance. However, expectations for a quick recovery can set the stage for future challenges. You in LA certainly know the results of that. In this phase, we can begin to see survivors' faith grapple with making sense of the experience, often thanking God for delivering them and their families, praying for those less fortunate. Themes of gratitude, solace, even lamentation can be heard as faith communities gather for funerals for those lost and support for those who survived. Survivors are grateful to be alive when others were not so fortunate. Those who have lost people or homes are comforted by a larger outpouring of the community, if not national support. In Sandy Hook, for example, we received prayer shawls and teddy bears by the truckload. There can be a strong sense of having shared a catastrophic event, and faith communities often commemorate those events with services or vigils. There can be a larger sense of community forged in multi-faith events as well. So faith-focused disaster response groups often join in with governmental agencies and private industries to process next steps and to provide hope. Here again, faith communities play a role in sustaining survivors. This community building is particularly crucial in reaching the third phase of the emotional trajectory following a disaster that's known as the disillusionment phase. As the reality of recovery sets in, the spotlight fades, and as the news reporters move along to the next big thing, many individuals experience a decline in optimism. Feelings of frustration, anger, exhaustion emerge as the challenges of rebuilding become apparent. This phase can last from several months to over a year and can be exacerbated by unmet expectations, slow progress, the inability to see anything around you changing. Anniversaries or reminders of the disaster can trigger renewed distress. Los Angeles has recently reached their 6-month milestone for the fires. The news media is back, but this time focused now on the immigration protests, the federal government response. The fires seem far away from the public imagination. So it's no surprise that people can feel left out or left behind. And with the bureaucratic delays, the red tape, changing rules, with piles of paperwork requiring documents that were oftentimes lost in the fire, there's so much seems to be left to do. Temporary housing is starting to feel less temporary, and financial stability is at risk. Support agencies are beginning to disappear, and even friends may say out loud, "Isn't it time to move on?" So faith begins to deal with issues such as anger with God, a reappraisal of the power of faith, questioning the efficacy of prayer, and confronting questions of meaning, justice, and fairness. Feelings arise such as being punished, hopelessness, fatalism, and those can lead to questioning core spiritual and faith values, as well as changing assumptions about life and the afterlife. We often hear people ask two defining questions: why me? Or why would God do this to me or allow this to happen to us? The spiritual struggles of faith and meaning may include a sense of abandonment by God, the faith community, the government, by others.
Hi. Hello.
So in this phase, it is important for faith communities to provide the reassurance of God's presence and power. Often acts of worship or rituals of purification and blessing can help. Classes or discussion groups around issues of doubt, anger, resilience can assist survivors in coming to transformative faith positions. Often, individual and face-to-face relationships become more important to plug those holes in the social network. And so church leaders' awareness of this situation is paramount. And finally, in the reconstruction phase, individuals and communities begin to rebuild their lives, establishing a new normal. While there's a sense of progress, challenges persist. Emotions such as grief and loss certainly continue, but there's a focus on adaptation and resilience. The duration of this phase varies and often extends for months or years, depending on the severity of the disaster. Faith-wise, this phase requires sustained community relationships. Grief work, rebuilding meaning making are all critical to resilience. Rebuilding often takes longer than people hoped or imagined, and community becomes a place to hold that hope. Moreover, there may be so-called trigger events that can affect survivors, such as birthdays, anniversaries, the anniversary of the disaster, or similar disasters occurring elsewhere. Faith communities can provide a stable platform for grief work, growth, and developing resilience. And the word resilience leads to a brief discussion of the emotional and faith recovery patterns. Most people, approximately 50%, according to PubMed Central, maintain a stable, healthy functioning over time. Their faith and mental health can be termed resilient. Some experience initial distress and faith questioning that diminishes over time and can be called recovering. A smaller group, around 30%, exhibit persistently high levels of distress, and that can be considered chronic. Indeed, the kinds of situations that Dr. Mischoulon pointed to. A minority, around 15%, experience moderate symptoms that worsen over time and are considered a delayed response to the disaster. So in those situations, it points to how do we deal with the emotional and faith aftermath. One, as Dr. Mischoulon pointed to, is seeking professional help. Engage with mental health professionals to address persistent symptoms. Clergy should welcome the opportunity to address faith struggles. Spiritual directors can assist survivors in finding new spiritual direction. Building social connections where we maintain relationships with friends, family, and community groups, especially faith groups. So finding a faith community in which you feel comfortable, heard, and spiritually nourished is important. Establishing routines, creating structures that provide stability, such as prayer, scripture, devotional readings, can build stability. Practicing self-care, as we heard before, engaging in activities that promote physical and emotional well-being, including sleep, nourishing body and soul. Expressing emotions by journaling, finding people you feel safe with, whom you can acknowledge, process feelings of grief, sadness, anger, issues of faith. Understanding these emotional phases and responses can aid in preparing for and navigating this complex journey of disaster recovery. And if you or someone you know is struggling, don't hesitate to seek support from mental health professionals, community resources, or clergy. So let me thank you again for your time. I want to end with this poem by Ellen Bass entitled The Thing Is. To life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weighs you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief. You think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes, and you say, yes, I will take you. I will love you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel. Now we are going to hear from Kimia Grigoriev, who is going to share with us resources about family and how to support families and children.
Thank you so much, Madeline. I actually shared a link in the chat too, just so they can see the same page. I know you're doing an amazing job with the group putting a resource thing together that's going to come up. This is just for now, but if you scroll down, I know I'm going to go through stuff fast, so I put some of the stuff here. So no worries if you miss it, you're going to receive all the resources later. But with that, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to the Harvard Club of Southern California for being such a strong supporter of the community and for making meaningful events like this possible. And thank you, Madeline. You were a huge help in this. My name is Kimia Grigoriev. I'm a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology, a behavior interventionist working with neurodivergent children from ages 1 to 23, a nurse, and an advocate focused on the intersection of mental health and public policy. Today, I'll be talking about how families, especially those with children, can process grief and begin emotional recovery after a traumatic event like LA fires. Disasters like this don't just damage homes, they disrupt a sense of safety, identity, and daily rhythm. For children, grief may not look like sadness. It often shows up as clinginess, irritability, changes in eating or sleeping, or even withdrawal. For neurodivergent children, the experience can be even more overwhelming. Many rely on routine, sensory tools, and familiar objects to stay regulated. When these are suddenly taken away, along with their physical environment, it can be deeply destabilizing. So how do we support children or ourselves through something like this? Let's start with communication. Use clear, age-appropriate language. It's okay to say, "This was very scary," and it's okay to feel sad and confused. You're safe now, and I'm here. If they ask questions you can't answer, responding with, "That's a great question. I don't know yet, but I'm figuring it out too." It helps build trust and emotional safety. For neurodivergent kids, communication may need extra support. And if you're unfamiliar with how to do that, here are a few helpful tips. Use visual schedules or first stand boards. These are picture-based guides that show what is happening and what is coming next. For example, first, eat breakfast with a picture of food. Then go to park with a picture of a swing. This can ease anxiety and help children know what to expect, especially when routines have been disrupted. You can also use social stories. These are simple, short stories that often have pictures and explain a situation and what a child can do. For example, a fire made us leave home. It was very scary. Now we are safe in a new place. It's okay to feel sad and scared. We are with people who care. Social stories help children understand what happened in a calm, predictable way. You can also make sure you use concrete and literal language. Avoid abstract or vague phrases like everything will be fine or home will be back soon, especially if it's uncertain. Instead, you can try to say, we are staying here tonight. We will eat after your bath. We don't know when we'll go home, but I will tell you as soon as I find out. And make sure you allow extra time for processing and for a response. Some children may need more time to understand what was said and think through their response. That doesn't mean they're ignoring you. It just means their brain is processing differently. So be patient, use visuals, and don't rush. Next, let's talk about structure and regulation. Children thrive on predictability. For neurodivergent children, routine isn't just helpful, it's essential. The sudden disruption of daily structure and loss of familiar sensory environment can lead to anxiety, shutdown, meltdowns, emotional exhaustion. One tool I often recommend is creating a safe space or a personalized comfort kit or emergency kit. This can include noise canceling headphones, favorite sensory toy or fidget toy, weighted blanket or lap pad or plush toy, laminated visual routines and comfort story, familiar snacks, a small item with a comforting scent, and chargers for communication devices. That's especially important for kids that use communication devices. But I also know many of you are already living in the aftermath. For those whose children have lost beloved items, a favorite blanket, a stuffed animal, or sensory tool, that grief can be deep. These aren't just things, they're emotional anchors. When that happens, validate the loss. Say, I know how important that was to you. It's okay you feel sad. If possible, involve the child in choosing a replacement, but acknowledge that it's okay if it's not the same thing. Create a ritual, draw the item, write a memory, or create a small goodbye ceremony together. Then introduce alternative regulation strategies that can help now and in the future situations. And I'm going to mention some of those now, and they're also on the site. So you can, I know I'm going to go through it fast. Grounding through texture and temperature. These can help shift focus from anxious thoughts or physical sensation. Hold a smooth rock or shell or soft fabric. Use warm compress, fuzzy socks, microwavable rice socks. Run hands under warm or cold water. Place a cool washcloth or ice pack on your forehead or neck. Squeeze a stress ball or cuddle a soft blanket. You can also use rhythmic breathing and sensory-friendly movement. These can regulate the nervous system and release buildup energy. For example, many of you are familiar with box breathing. It's inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4 again. You can do that a couple of times. Blow bubbles or pinwheels. That naturally creates that breathing technique too. Do butterfly taps. You can do it on your shoulders, on your hands, on your arms. And then gentle rocking in chair or while standing. There's also, you can do bear crawls, crab walks. That is another thing that can help. Swinging and bouncing on a yoga ball is also helpful if it's available to you. Soft lighting and calming sensory spaces can also be very helpful. So creating a cozy sensory-friendly retreat wherever you are. You can use twinkling lights, color-changing night lights, or lava lamps. Play calming music, white noise, or nature sounds, whatever the child seems to prefer. I know some kids really don't like nature sounds, so you want to make sure it's something that they enjoy. And you can include pillows, cozy corner, or make a blanket fort. And you can add noise-canceling headphones, journals, or simple activities like coloring or puzzles. You can also build in family-based healing activities. That's also mentioned on the site too, with a little bit more information, but I'm going to go through it fast here. You can do feelings, drawing, or collage for nonverbal emotional expressions. That's especially helpful for neurodivergent kids. And memory jars. You can use a safe space to store memories, hopes, or worries, and later on you can read through them with the family and talk through them if you wish. A calm corner, a designed sensory safe zone. Gratitude ritual. Share one good thing each day. That doesn't take away from your grief, but it helps with resilience. Story building together. Create stories about characters who heal and grow. Feelings chart. Use emojis or colors to help identify emotions. Again, that can be really helpful for neurodivergent kids. Plant something together. It can symbolize growth, resilience, and hope. Now I want to speak directly to the parents and caregivers. You are doing so much. You are likely grieving too, and still trying to show up every day for children. And that's hard, especially when your own nervous system is exhausted. But remember, your children look to you to understand how to feel. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real and regulated. You can say, I feel really overwhelmed right now. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. Want to do it with me? That moment is powerful. That's co-regulation, and it models resilience in real time. For those parenting neurodivergent children, I want to say this especially to you. You are not just parenting, you are translating the world to your child, explaining their needs, and advocating constantly. That takes a toll. You deserve support just as much as your child does. I leave you with this. Grief is not something we fix, it's something we carry with compassion, with patience, and with community. And while it doesn't disappear, it can become something we learn to hold and grow through together. When children feel safe, seen, and soothed, even after losing the tools they relied on, they begin to heal. And when caregivers are supported, families can rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally too. Thank you so much for being here today and for everything you're doing for your families, your communities, and for yourself. And the link is there for you, and I'm sure soon Madeline and team will send you a whole list of resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kimia. So now we are going to hear from Dr. Cynthia Meyersburg.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I also have a few slides, so let me go ahead and share my screen. I am really honored to be part of this, and let me just get my slideshow playing. So thank you very much to Kimia, to you, and to the entire Harvard Club of Southern California. I'm really delighted to be here with you and to sit with you during what I know is a very difficult time. So I'm a lecturer for the Division of Continuing Education at Harvard, and I teach a class on grief. So we'll talk about some other things. Grief is really something I spend a lot of time with. And something I think it's important for people to know is that in the wake of major life disruption, trauma, and loss, it is normal to feel exhausted. It is normal to feel distress and sorrow. It is normal to feel discouraged, overwhelmed, and/or on edge. When you are in a dangerous situation, it is your job to get to safety. Then once you are safe, you contend with the load from what has happened. And for many of you, you're probably just now getting to safe. You know, it's been very challenging or in the process of that. Something that people sometimes forget until it creeps up on them, and this really won't be surprising, I think, to any of you, but grief is cumulative. So when a loss happens, we re-grieve our previous losses, and that too is normal. When I worked with children who'd lost a classmate in 9/11, before I started my doctoral program, I did volunteer grief counseling with children who'd lost a classmate in 9/11, and what I found was that the children came in and told me about when the cat died, when grandpa died, when mom had a miscarriage. These losses pile up, and when we get to a new loss, we re-grieve it. For those of you who are parents, be aware that as children can process a loss at a new developmental level, they're going to re-grieve it. So they're going to grieve now, but they're also going to grieve it again as they understand their losses in a more developmentally advanced way. And this is also normal. So I've got some books that I love to recommend. And of course, these will also be in the slides, so you don't have to jot them down now, you'll have them. But some books I particularly recommend are When Bad Things Happen to Good People. That's one that I think people find very useful when they're grieving or going through a difficult time. How to Get Run Over by a Truck by Katie McKenna, who wrote it literally about when she got run over by a truck. And she's doing well now, I will tell you. And then Resilient Grieving by Lucy Hone, who had a really tragic experience of losing her daughter, who was, I think, 11 or 12 at the time, and unexpectedly, and talking about, and she studies resilience. So she knew what she was up against, and she's written this gorgeous book called Resilient Grieving, which is also very helpful. So these are all good resources to have for yourself and for your loved ones. Another book that I recommend that everybody read at least once, and I would actually say you probably want to read it more than once in your life, is Man's Search for Meaning. It was written by Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, who survived the Holocaust. The book was written in 1946, but he survived, but he lost his family, including his wife, his parents. It was tragic. And then what do you do when the unthinkable has happened? And I will say, sometimes people say, well, but my loss isn't as big as someone else's loss. But I'm going to tell you that if you're trampled by one elephant or by 17 elephants, you're still trampled. So you don't have to compare your pain to someone else's. It's your pain and it's real, and you have to contend with it. So I've got a few that I've picked out for you just to tempt you to read this book, because it's a really useful read. And I want you to think about them. So, and I will say that these are good things to think about and talk about with friends and loved ones. So ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Another one. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And finally, and I know that this is gendered language, but this is translated from the German, so I can't speak to how it is in the original, but here we go. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So at times when things are hard, and they're really hard, and you really are suffering, these are things to think about. Maybe you can't, maybe you can't change the situation. What can you change? Maybe it doesn't seem meaningful, but what meaning can you make? What can you do here? How can you be in this moment? So what do we do in the face of human suffering? Often people are looking for happiness, they say, but I'm going to tell you, research backs me on this, but also just philosophically, I think as well. But don't try to find happiness. Instead, you need to do something that is meaningful, contribute in some way, do something that matters. Often you will find happiness along the way, but even if you do not find happiness, you will have made the world richer in some way. But the odds are that if you're spending your time doing meaningful things and engaged in what is meaningful, you will find happiness. You will be happy again. But even if you aren't, it will still be meaningful. It will still be valuable. So hang in there and do meaningful things. And what do you do in the face of your own suffering? I've had students who are terminally ill. I've had students who struggle with losses of children. I've had friends who've had to struggle with these issues as well, with losses that can be seen coming, like ALS, and losses that cannot be seen coming, like a brain aneurysm. What do you do when there's suffering and you cannot avoid suffering? So if you find yourself suffering terribly, and you realize that current you, the you who is here in this moment, must suffer right now, then what I urge you to do is think of your future self in the same way you would think of a child you dearly love. Ask yourself what you can do for future you. Find a thing you can do, one thing to do to make life better for future you, and do that thing. And whenever you're feeling hopeless, do a little thing for that future you. Maybe you can't be happy right now, but maybe you 3 years from now could be and would be so grateful that you paid the bills, that you maintained friendships, that you exercised, that you did kind things in the world. That future you may want to look back in time and hug the current you who is suffering with great gratitude. Position yourself that way. So sometimes people ask me about the right way to grieve and about grieving. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. So I'm just going to very quickly touch on this. Also a very good book, but what she did was she was revolutionary. She listened to terminally ill people and helped them to be heard. She increased public awareness of the lack of appropriate end-of-life care, and she testified to the US Senate about problems in the care of terminally ill people. She did really important work. And what she found among the terminally ill people with whom she was working were these stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And they've been very well accepted culturally. But what's their scientific status? And the truth is, these are true, but only for a subset of grievers. Other people don't necessarily experience all of the stages or don't experience them in this order or in this way. And this can be problematic when people misunderstand Kubler-Ross's 5 stages. They were originally developed, as I was saying, to help to describe people coping with terminal illness, but they weren't really intended to describe grief broadly, and they weren't based on that. The stages are applicable for about 10% of people in exactly as they're described in Kubler-Ross's writing, but not everyone who's terminally ill experiences them all. In fact, Kubler-Ross found herself stuck when she was having multiple debilitating strokes and was dying herself over a period of time. She did not experience denial or bargaining, but found herself stuck in anger for quite a long while. One common problem is clinicians misunderstand Kubler-Ross's work. She herself invited further work and criticism and understanding in work, so she was not threatened by the notion that people might find other things for other populations. Her work has been misused as being prescriptive with patients, so they maybe feel that they're expected to fit a model that might or might not actually fit for them. So conceptualizing the model as having stages could make people feel pressure to achieve a certain stage or in a particular linear progression. That's not helpful for people, and it's not accurate. So Kubler-Ross relied on qualitative interview data to develop her stages. And of course, it needs to be tested using other types of data, et cetera, et cetera. What she did was wonderful, important, and groundbreaking, but it doesn't answer for every situation. And it shouldn't be seen that way. That's not what she was aiming for. So she herself acknowledges limitations and left lots of space for researchers to investigate further, which has been happening, but hasn't been as well culturally accepted and understood. Another thing that's really exciting is the work of Teshi and Calhoun about post-traumatic growth. So in the face of having survived a trauma, it is possible to have post-traumatic growth. It's not only bad things that can come out of losses and traumas. Sometimes good things come too. And sometimes the good things and the bad things come. So a person could have PTSD, but also end up experiencing post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, people find new possibilities, find themselves relating better with others and more closely with others. They develop personal strength they didn't know they had. They experience spiritual changes that can bring them lots of meaning. And a real appreciation of life can develop from this. So post-traumatic growth can take place in any or all of these areas and can be really important to people and really valuable. But how do we get there? We have to have self-care too. So I know others have touched on this, so I will briefly as well. So this cartoon, in case everyone can't read it, is I know you're always taking care of everyone else, but you need to take care of yourself too. Also, I need my stethoscope back. Right? So you've got this woman who's being seen by a medical professional, and the medical professional, she's trying to take care of him. And think about your self-care. And those of you who are parents, I know you're taking care of kids as well, but or grandchildren or whoever it is in your life that you're caring for, spouses, whoever, but anyone who's caring for others, you also want to model, especially if you're around children, what self-care is, because then they learn to do it too, and it's important. So even you have to take care of yourself and be a role model of self-caregiving. The old line about when the oxygen mask drops, you put yours on and then you help everyone else is important. So some examples of self-care are having healthy meals, hydrating, exercising, spending time with loved ones, getting adequate sleep, having regular medical care. Go ahead and get your teeth cleaned, take some time to relax if you can, and access community support, whatever that is, whether it's your spiritual community, whether it's your friends you go walking with, whoever it is, whether it's your Harvard Club friends. And then also have some self-compassion. You don't have to be perfect in any of this, but you want to work towards having good self-care. It's going to help you be resilient. It's going to help you recover. So think about what fills your cup. What helps you? Is it yoga, taking a shower, your faith-based community? Is it going dancing? Is it dancing at home? Is it calling a friend, baking, cooking, creating art, sports, whether it's watching it or participating in it, even better, listening to music that lifts you up, watching a favorite movie or show, swimming, whatever it is, think about what fills your cup and make sure you're filling your cup. Now, I'm going to recommend something. I want you to know that I am in no way endorsed by, I've never taken any money from, I don't even know the people who developed this app, but I've seen it work very well for students. And I think it's one that, of all ages, and I think it's really kind of a fun, nice one. It's called Finch, and you can look it up on finchcare.com. It's an app that, that one takes care of a little zebra finch, and in so doing, the little zebra finch, the things you do to earn points are things like, did you get out of bed? Did you brush your teeth? Did you change your clothes? Or whatever it is, you can tailor it to be the things you're having trouble with. Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's reaching out to others, maybe it's being kind to yourself. But it's a really lovely little app. It has a free version and also a paid version, and it might be a useful way and a kind of gamifying way for those who like that sort of thing, to encourage yourself to just do the nice little things, whether it's calling a friend, all kinds of things. You can personalize it for you. So another recommendation I have is you can check out Dr. Lucy Hohn's very helpful website. She's the one who wrote Resilient Grieving. Her website is about helping individuals, teams, and communities cope with the hard stuff. So you can look at her website and see her resources and her availability for things. Another question I get is, well, okay, grief is normal and it's a part of the human process, and it would be a terribly sad thing if we never grieved, right? If we never loved or connected enough to grieve for anything, that would be sad, right? So, but when do we seek help? When we all feel sad in the wake of something bad happening to us. When do we seek help? So if you find that you're experiencing nightmares or other problems sleeping and it's ongoing, if you're avoiding reminders of what happened, if you're having an exaggerated startle response, unable to experience happiness, feeling on hyper alert, having panic symptoms, or reliving the events, those could be PTSD symptoms or depression symptoms. Whatever they are, they need attending. And most especially if you're having thoughts of harming yourself or someone else. Those thoughts can be very, very distressing, right? Any of those things are going on, it's time to reach out for help, because there is help and you deserve it. And you need to take care of you and to show yourself compassion and kindness. It's what you would tell a friend. It's what you should do for yourself. So how do you find therapists who can help? Well, you can network and ask people you know, but you also can use these resources, if you're looking for cognitive behavioral therapy, which I support because it's very strongly empirically supported. The Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies is one resource. Prolonged grief therapy or complicated grief therapy, you can contact the Center for Prolonged Grief. And EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, has pretty good support for PTSD treatment. That's another thing you can look at. And there are other resources as well, but these are a few that I've had people have good luck using. Finally, what about for things for children? I recommended books for grownups. Here's a list from St. Jude's Hospital, which I'll also link, but here are the books that they recommend for people. Memory Box is a very popular one, but these, and The Invisible String also is very well regarded, of grief books for children. To this list, I will add that there's a gentle book about PTSD called Big Bear Was Not the Same. And it's about a bear who survived a forest fire and is struggling with PTSD. So I don't know, for some people it might be too on the nose, and for others it might be just right, but it's a lovely, gentle book about someone living with someone who's got PTSD. And a book for children and the people who love them, Taking a Bath with a Dog and Other Things That Make Me Happy. This book helps kids and their people find joy on challenging days. So last thing I'll say is we are cheering, all of us on this panel, we are cheering for you to get through this, for you and the people you love to get through this. And we are charging current you with an important job. Please take loving care of future you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and David and everyone else on this panel. So this concludes the presentation part of this session. I am going to stop the recording and we're going to move into the Q&A part of this presentation.